It's for amateur astronomy, I explained, radiating passion I didn't entirely feel. A lifelong dream. Want to share the wonders of the cosmos with my children, inspire their scientific curiosity, you know? Brenda chewed her gum slowly, eyeing my sketches. Looks kinda tall, sir, and awful close to where that treehouse was we just sighted. Needed a clear view, I countered smoothly. Free from terrestrial obstructions, for optimal celestial viewing. Meets all the specs for an observation platform under 17.4. Subsection C, paragraph 2. Educational use. She sighed, stamped my application with profound lack of enthusiasm, and took my permit fee. Provisional approval granted. It started, as all great suburban tragedies do, with joy. Pure, unadulterated, slightly wobbly joy. Behold, Fort Awesome, perched 12 feet up in the sturdy branches of the old oak tree in our backyard. For 3 weekends I'd measured, sometimes twice, sawed, mostly straight lines, and hammered, only hitting my thumb 4 times, a personal best. It wasn't exactly architectural digest material, let's be honest. The ladder was a bit crooked, one window was slightly smaller than the other, and the roof had a certain rustic charm. But Maya, my 10-year-old, and Finn, my 8-year-old, didn't care. To them it was perfect. A spaceship soaring through the cosmos 1 minute, a dragon-proof castle the next, a top-secret spy headquarters after lunch. Their laughter echoing down from the leaves was the best sound in the world. I leaned against the tree, surveying my handiwork, sawdust in my hair, pride swelling in my chest. 60 square feet of childhood magic. What could possibly be wrong with that? Famous last words. Across the meticulously maintained, geometrically perfect fence line, a curtain twitched. Beatrice Bottomley, my neighbor. A woman whose primary source of joy seemed to be the meticulous documentation of other people's minor infractions. Her face appeared in the gap between her prize-winning and soul-crushingly dull ornamental grasses. Eyes narrowed, scanning, always scanning. I swear she had built-in rangefinders. "Afternoon, Beatrice," I called out, forcing a cheerful wave. "Impressive, right? The kids are thrilled." Her expression didn't change. It was that patented look of vague disapproval mixed with the calculation of exactly which ordinance this new development violated. Without a word, she disappeared back into the beige depths of her perfectly ordered home. Ominous? You betcha. Like a storm cloud full of zoning regulations gathering on the horizon. 2 days later, the storm broke. Not a beige HOA envelope this time, oh no. This was official. City of Alexandria. Stark white envelope. Crisp city crest. Delivered by hand. By Officer Davies, a man whose weary expression suggested he'd seen far too many neighborly disputes escalate into absurdity. He stood on my doorstep, looking genuinely apologetic, which almost made it worse. "Mr. Maxwell? Sorry to bother you, but we received a complaint regarding the, elevated wooden structure in your backyard." Structure. Cold, bureaucratic. "You mean Fort Awesome?" I asked, gesturing proudly towards the treehouse, where Finn was currently making spaceship noises. "The kids love it." Officer Davies sighed. The sigh of a man forced to crush childhood dreams on a regular basis. "Sir, I understand, but a complaint was filed anonymously." His eyes flickered briefly towards Beatrice's house. We both knew. "And unfortunately, the structure appears to violate City Ordinance 1138, subsection B, setback requirements from the property line." "Setback? It's in my tree, on my property." "Yes, sir, but the ordinance requires a 5-foot setback from the property line for any accessory structure over 8 feet in height. Your treehouse, Seems to be only about 3 feet from the fence at its nearest point. He consulted his clipboard. And it also likely exceeds the 8-foot height limit for structures built without a permit under Ordinance 1142, subsection C. Double whammy, setback and height. Cooked by the codebook. But it's just a treehouse, for kids. It's harmless, I pleaded, desperation creeping in. I get it, Mr. Maxwell, I really do, Davies said, shuffling his feet. But rules are rules. A complaint was filed. My hands are tied. You'll need to dismantle it or significantly modify it to bring it into compliance within 30 days. I have to issue a formal notice. He handed me the paper, the official death warrant for Fort Awesome. Later that day, fueled by righteous indignation and the heartbreaking sight of Maya trying to explain zoning laws to her stuffed bear, I decided to attempt diplomacy. A fool's errand, I know, but I had to try. I found Beatrice in her front yard, engaged in what looked like mortal combat with a slightly overgrown lavender bush. Beatrice, I began, keeping my voice calm, reasonable. About the treehouse. Come on. It's making the kids so incredibly happy. Is there any way we can work something out? She paused her pruning, turning those icy eyes on me. Happiness, Mr. Maxwell, she sniffed, adjusting her gardening gloves, is not a valid exemption from municipal code. That thing encroaches upon my visual serenity. Visual serenity? I barely kept the disbelief out of my voice. It's a few planks of wood in a tree. What serenity is it blocking? Your view of my garbage cans? It affects the lines, Mr. Maxwell, she declared, as if that explained everything. The harmonious flow of the neighborhood aesthetic. Furthermore, its proximity raises potential concerns regarding property boundaries and overlooks. Overlooks? Into her yard filled with rocks and aggressively boring shrubs? What was I going to overlook? Her strategic placement of decorative pebbles? Beatrice, please, I tried again. The kids are devastated. Perhaps, she said, turning back to her lavender bush with chilling finality, they should engage in less elevated pastimes. The only working out that concerns me involves the prompt removal of that non-compliant structure. Good day. With a vicious snip, she decapitated a perfectly healthy lavender stalk. Message received. Explaining it to Maya and Finn was brutal. Tears, wails, accusations of broken promises. But you said it could stay forever, Dad, Finn sobbed. It felt like ripping up a winning lottery ticket in front of them. Gwen tried her best, comforting them, shooting me looks that pleaded for sanity, for restraint. It's just wood, Leo, she murmured later. Don't go to war over it. But it wasn't just wood. It was dreams. It was effort. It was a middle finger to the beige, fun-hating bureaucracy embodied by Beatrice Bottomley. And she'd won. Or so she thought. That night, staring bleakly at the Alexandria City Zoning website, the cold, hard text mocking me, something snapped. Ordinances 1138, B and 1142. C swam before my eyes. Setbacks, height limits, permits, accessory structures, dwellings. The words started to blur, then refocus. Wait a minute. Accessory structures? Dwellings? What about things that weren't meant to be lived in? Things built for other purposes? My gaze drifted across the garage workshop, landing on the dusty corner where my old telescope resided. A relic from a brief, misguided astronomy phase years ago. Astronomy, science, observation, education. Beatrice's complaint was about height, setback, proximity, overlooking. What if I built something else tall? Something technically compliant under a different classification. Something designed not for dwelling, but for observing. Something that, purely by chance, might offer an unparalleled view of the fascinating ecosystem just over the fence? A slow, dangerous grin spread across my face, the kind of grin that makes wives sigh and hardware store owners rub their hands together. "Okay, Beatrice," I whispered to the glowing computer screen, the rage solidifying into a beautifully petty, overly complex plan. "You want war? You'll get war, with orbital mechanics and zoning loopholes." Project Mockingbird was cleared for launch. First order of business: become an armchair expert in Alexandria municipal zoning. Joy. Forget novels, forget streaming services. My evenings were now filled with the thrilling prose of setback variances, floor area ratios, and conditional use permits. I highlighted sections. I made spreadsheets. I may have created a flowchart. Gwen looked increasingly concerned. But I found it. The loophole, buried deep in Chapter 17. Special structures and miscellaneous uses. Treehouses, restricted. Sheds, regulated, but freestanding observation decks or platforms for scientific equipment under 150 square feet. Aha! Different rules entirely. Slightly more generous height allowance, potentially different setback requirements if not classified as habitable, and crucially, requiring only a straightforward minor structures permit, if under a certain threshold. Bingo. My trip to the city planning department was a masterclass in feigned sincerity. I presented my carefully drafted plans for an elevated observation platform to a skeptical-looking clerk named Brenda, no relation to the contractor, I hoped. "It's for amateur astronomy," I explained, radiating passion I didn't entirely feel. "A lifelong dream. Want to share the wonders of the cosmos with my children, inspire their scientific curiosity, you know?" Brenda chewed her gum slowly, eyeing my sketches. "Looks kinda tall, sir, and awful close to where that treehouse was we just sighted." "Needed a clear view," I countered smoothly. "Free from terrestrial obstructions, for optimal celestial viewing. Meets all the specs for an observation platform under 17.4. Subsection C, paragraph 2. Educational use." She sighed, stamped my application with profound lack of enthusiasm, and took my permit fee. Provisional approval granted. Phase 1 accomplished. Next, the hardware. My old telescope, bless its dusty lens, was basically a cardboard tube with spectacles. If I was going to build a towering monument to spite, it needed a suitably impressive centerpiece. And online shopping ensued. Oh, the rabbit hole of telescope websites, refractors versus reflectors, equatorial mounts versus alt-azimuth. Aperture fever gripped me. I needed power. Magnification? The ability to see, well, distant objects. Very clearly. "Honey?" Gwen's voice, deceptively calm, drifted into my office later that week. She was holding the credit card statement. "Could you perhaps explain Astrotech LX200 ultra-giant robotic space cannon with optional lunar landing site imaging package, and why it appears to have cost slightly more than our kitchen renovation?" I minimized the browser window displaying best telescope eyepieces for terrestrial observation. "Ah, that. It's the heart of the observation platform. State-of-the-art educational tool for the kids. Think of the science reports they'll write." Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And tell me, Leo, purely hypothetically, does this educational tool possess the theoretical capability to, say, observe whether Beatrice Bottomley remembered to water her prize-winning and intensely beige chrysanthemums this morning?" "The physics are complex, dear," I mumbled. "Coincidental alignments can occur." Salvation arrived in the form of Walter Walt Kowalski from down the street. Retired high school physics teacher, president of the local astronomy club, all 3 members, and possessor of a garage that was part workshop, part observatory, part controlled explosion waiting to happen. Walt had heard about the Treehouse tragedy via the highly efficient neighborhood rumor mill. Chief operator, Gary, 2 doors down. He found Beatrice Bottomley, and I quote, "a festering boil on the backside of suburban tranquility." He saw the enormous crate containing the Astrotech LX200 on my driveway. His eyes lit up. "Leo, my boy, what in Galileo's ghost is that?" I explained the plan. The treehouse, Beatrice, the loophole, the tower, the telescope. Walt practically cackled. "Magnificent, poetic justice. Bottomley got your kid's treehouse, that old bat, a tower, with that scope." He patted the crate reverently. "Revenge served cold, with a side of serious optics. Need any help collimating the primary mirror, Leo? Got a spare laser collimator somewhere, and maybe an old equatorial mount that could handle this beast." Walt was in. My slightly mad, deeply enthusiastic, technically proficient co-conspirator. The first step was dismantling Fort Awesome. That hurt. Maya and Finn stood by looking miserable. I salvaged some of the wood, promising them the tower would be way cooler. Finn asked if it would have a laser cannon. I told him probably not. Then, construction began. New concrete footings, carefully measured to be just outside the original footprint, meeting the setback for the new classification. Then, the frame. 4 sturdy posts, cross-braced like a railway bridge, Walt insisted, rising up and up. 15, maybe 16 feet to the platform level. Higher than the treehouse, significantly higher. The familiar symphony of suburban construction returned. The whine of the saw, the thwack of the hammer, the weekend morning rumble of deliveries. And like clockwork, the complaints. Beatrice was watching, always watching. Her calls to Officer Davies became a daily occurrence. Davies showed up again, looking like he hadn't slept since our last chat. "Mr. Maxwell," he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Another complaint. Several, actually, about the replacement structure. I beamed, waving my freshly laminated permit. "Officer Davies, good to see you. Just admiring my progress on the amateur astronomical observation platform, fully permitted, as you know. Educational use." Davies squinted up at the towering frame. "It looks substantially taller than the previous structure, Mr. Maxwell, and the permit application mentioned wood construction. This looks like steel reinforcements." "Safety first, officer," I chirped. "Especially with delicate scientific equipment involved. All within the height limits for this classification, though. And the primary structure is wood." Clad around the steel Walt insisted on. Just ensuring stability against, wind shear, for precise astronomical measurements. Davies sighed again, a sound deep with the existential weariness of dealing with people like me and Beatrice. "Right, measurements. Just try to keep the noise down before 8 a.m., okay? Mrs. Bottomley seems particularly sensitive to hammering during her morning meditation." He gave the tower one last dubious look, shook his head, and retreated. Finally, the platform was built, the railing installed, extra high, for safety. Now came the main event, getting the Astrotech LX200 Leviathan to the summit. This required ropes, Walt's questionable pulley system, involving a modified boat winch, me hauling, Walt shouting contradictory instructions, "No, the other rope, pivot, pivot." Gwen watching from the kitchen window with her hands clasped in prayer, and Finn helpfully trying to secure a rope to a plastic lawn flamingo. There was a moment, a heart-stopping, slow-motion moment, where the telescope, dangling precariously 15 feet up, started to swing. It arced wildly, missing my head by inches, then waltz, before I managed to grab a dangling strap and wrestle it back under control. After much sweating, swearing, muffled mostly, and near catastrophe, it was done. The telescope was bolted securely onto the heavy-duty mount Walt had provided. It gleamed menacingly in the afternoon sun, a cyclopean eye pointed towards the infinite, or potentially the slightly less infinite expanse of Beatrice Bottomley's backyard. "There she sits," Walt declared, patting the telescope's barrel. "The Eye of Sauron, Suburban Edition, ready to pierce the veil of night." As dusk began to settle, Walt and I climbed the tower for the first light ceremony, aligning the finder scope, focusing on the moon rising fat and yellow over the rooftops. Then Jupiter, its tiny moons visible as pinpricks of light. It was kind of awesome. Then, casually, experimentally, I nudged the fine adjustment controls. The view drifted downwards, past the neighbor's chimney, over the power lines, down. "Whoa, Walt!" I exclaimed, maybe a little too loudly. "Look at the incredible detail on, those fascinating nocturnal beetles congregating near Mrs. Bottomley's prize-winning petunias. Remarkable!" Right on cue, Beatrice emerged into her backyard, watering can in hand. She glanced up as she always did, probably checking for errant squirrels or misplaced clouds. Her eyes landed on the tower, on the massive telescope silhouetted against the darkening sky, on us, looking through it. Her face went pale. The watering can slipped from her grasp, clattering onto her pristine patio pavers. She stared for another second, pure horror dawning in her eyes, then turned and practically sprinted back inside, slamming her door shut. Walt and I exchanged a look. A silent, giddy, slightly wicked understanding passed between us. "Remarkable optics," Walt murmured, a grin spreading across his face. "Indeed," I replied, trying to suppress my own triumphant smirk. "Purely for science, of course." The psychological warfare had begun. My newfound passion for amateur astronomy became consuming. Suspiciously consuming. Rain or shine, clear skies or cloudy, I found reasons to be up on the tower platform. Sometimes with Maya and Finn pointing out constellations, real ones. Sometimes with Walt discussing nebulae and galactic clusters, loudly. And sometimes, often, alone. Especially when Beatrice was pottering around in her yard. I made sure she saw me, adjusting the gleaming brass knobs, squinting into the eyepiece, making notes in a large, official-looking logbook I'd bought specially. I never waved. I never acknowledged her presence directly. I just observed. The sky, naturally. Always the sky. But I developed a habit of vocalizing my discoveries, pitching my voice just loud enough to carry over the fence on a still evening. "Walt, extraordinary! Did you see that? The atmospheric disturbance directly over Mrs. Bottomley's bird feeder? Fascinating pressure gradient." Beatrice was refilling her bird feeder. Tracking satellite SV-297B. Trajectory seems to take it directly across, yes, right over Beatrice's perfectly aligned compost bins. Intriguing. Good heavens, could it be Lepidoptera nocturna exhibiting unusual swarming behavior near Mrs. Bottomley's azaleas? Must document. Beatrice was weeding near her azaleas. I never ever said I was watching her. Oh no, that would be gauche, and probably illegal. My observations were strictly scientific. If she happened to be in the line of sight between my telescope and, say, a particularly interesting patch of atmospheric haze, well, that was just unfortunate cosmic coincidence. Beatrice, predictably, began to unravel. The curtain twitching became frantic, almost constant. New, thicker curtains appeared overnight. Then, ugly bamboo privacy screens were hastily erected along the fence line, probably violating half a dozen codes themselves, but I wasn't complaining. She bought 3 enormous patio umbrellas and positioned them like shields over her favorite benches. One memorable afternoon, a giant, inflatable unicorn appeared tethered in her backyard, directly between the tower and her back door. It swayed slightly in the breeze, its vacant plastic eyes staring blankly at my telescope. Her calls to Officer Davies, according to Walt, who had a friend in the dispatch office, shifted from annoyed to desperate to borderline unhinged. "Officer Davies, Beatrice Bottomley, he knows! He knows I switched to decaf. He commented on the specific migratory pattern of the grackles that poop on my patio furniture. You have to make him stop the astro-spying." "Davies, Bottomley! He's using space lasers. I saw a glint. He's probably reading my thoughts. He mentioned my penchant for prune juice. This is harassment via telescope." Officer Davies, bless his beleaguered soul, apparently started screening her calls, but the sheer volume, the escalating weirdness. Psychic surveillance via Schmidt-Cassegrain, attempted begonia criticism from altitude, eventually forced the city's hand. The notice arrived. Final inspection and complaint resolution meeting. Officer Davies and his supervisor, Miss Petrov, the head of code enforcement, would be attending. Beatrice, naturally, would also be present. My presence and access to the structure in question was mandatory. The day arrived. Davies and Petrov stood on my lawn, looking grim. Beatrice stood beside them, practically vibrating with vindicated fury. "Mr. Maxwell," Miss Petrov began, her voice sharp and no nonsense. "We're here to address Mrs. Bottomley's persistent and rather colorful allegations regarding your observation platform and its primary use." Allegations? I feigned bewildered innocence. "Good heavens, I assure you, Miss Petrov, this tower is purely for scientific and educational pursuits. Harassment, the very idea," I gestured expansively. "Perhaps an inspection is in order. Come on up. Mind the ladder, it's a bit authentic." They exchanged skeptical looks, but followed me up the surprisingly sturdy "Thanks, Walt" ladder to the platform. Beatrice remained below, glaring upwards. "As you can see," I announced, sweeping my arm around, "a perfect, unobstructed view of the heavens. Now, where were we?" I swung the massive telescope demonstrably towards a distant water tower. "Ah, observing potential atmospheric lensing effects around distant structures. Fascinating." I then produced my logbook. "And here's my observation log, meticulously kept. See? Planetary movements, meteor shower counts, notes on variable stars. Absolutely no mention of terrestrial horticulture or beverage preferences." Walt, who had conveniently dropped by, chimed in. "Indeed. The equatorial mount requires precise polar alignment for tracking celestial objects. Any significant deviation for, shall we say, neighborhood viewing," he winked almost imperceptibly, "would necessitate a complete and tedious recalibration process. Highly impractical." "He's lying!" Beatrice shrieked from below, pointing a trembling finger. "Last Tuesday, 8:17 p.m., he was aiming it right at my dining room window. I saw the moonlight glinting. He was watching me eat my tapioca pudding." I sighed dramatically. "Beatrice, with all due respect, that wasn't moonlight on the telescope. That was the reflection of Jupiter. It was particularly bright last Tuesday around 8:15. Opposition, you know. Basic astronomy." I peered into the eyepiece. "In fact, it's just clearing the horizon now. Care to take a look? Verify my findings?" I offered her the eyepiece with my most helpful smile. She sputtered, refusing to climb the tower, perhaps realizing how unhinged she sounded, claiming I was spying on her pudding consumption. Miss Petrov and Officer Davies inspected the structure. They measured the platform, under 150 square feet. They checked the setbacks, compliant for an observation platform. They looked at my permit. They looked at the giant telescope. They looked at Beatrice, who was now muttering about mind control rays. Petrov finally sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose, a gesture I was becoming very familiar with from city officials. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice tight with resignation. "While the intensity of your astronomical hobby raises eyebrows and Mrs. Bottomley's distress is noted, we cannot find a definitive code violation based on the permit issued for this structure." She eyed the telescope. "And while the potential for misuse is obvious, we have no concrete proof of harassment." She turned to Beatrice. "Mrs. Bottomley, we cannot act without evidence of a specific violation or provable harassment." She then looked back at me. "Mr. Maxwell, I strongly advise responsible and respectful use of your equipment. Consider this a warning. Any verifiable proof of misuse, and we'll be back." They climbed down, issued a final warning glare towards me and a sympathetic but firm look towards Beatrice, and left. I stood on my tower, victorious. The Eye of Sauron remained. Life settled into a new, weird normal. Beatrice retreated into a state of heavily curtained siege warfare. She occasionally emerged, scuttling between bushes, always casting paranoid glances up at the silent, impassive telescope. The giant inflatable unicorn became a permanent, slightly deflated fixture in her yard. Eventually, a "for sale" sign appeared. It sold surprisingly quickly. Maybe the portcullis guy down the street made the neighborhood seem exciting. The kids? They forgot the treehouse. The tower was way cooler. Looking at Saturn's rings beat pretending a wooden box was a spaceship any day. Gwen just rolled her eyes whenever she saw me heading up the ladder, but I caught her smiling sometimes. Walt and I continued our astronomical observations, though perhaps with slightly less performative commentary. So the tower stands, a 16-foot monument to spite, zoning loopholes, and a father's righteous indignation. Is it ridiculous? Absolutely. Was it worth it? Every single splinter, every strained muscle, every exasperated sigh from my wife. Sometimes, late at night, I go up there. Look at the actual stars. It's peaceful, quiet. And from this high up, you can really appreciate the intricate beauty of the cosmos. And, coincidentally, you also get a really clear view of whether the new neighbors remembered to take their bins in. Fascinating stuff, this science. Now, Walt was mentioning something about radio telescopes. I wonder what the city ordinances say about large satellite dishes.